Welcome, people, to a new episode of Lichtblog Professionals. And today I have a really special guest, and his name is Martin Moore-Ede, if I said that correctly. You're from the United States of America, and I actually came across you via LinkedIn. Yeah, it's really like I'm not that much into LinkedIn, but you're posting regularly on LinkedIn, and I saw your book about light. It's called Light Doctor, right? And it really impressed me because it summarized many key issues we have right now, and yeah, about circadian health, about light, and definitely a good read. So also something to recommend to the audience here. And you are an associate professor, or you have been an associate professor at Harvard. You're the director of the Circadian Light Research Centers in, is it Boston, or where are
Near,
you?
near Boston, yes.
Near Boston. Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. And I think apparently you are quite a guy to talk to, because you also did this, and I found that really interesting. It's this paper you brought out, and you asked like researchers about a consensus. What do you agree on and what not? But we can maybe talk more later in detail about it when it comes to circadian health and light. So yeah, welcome.
Good, thank you. Good to speak with you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Um, The first question I have for you, actually, and maybe we can start with that, is like, why is light in general a really unattractive topic? Do you think it's like for the general public? Do you?
Well, I think people take light for granted. It's so
Okay.
easy these days. It's just a switch on the wall or lights come on automatically, and people just don't think about it. And this issue with light, of course, it's not just for vision, although most of the focus is on visual aesthetics. How does it look? People can judge that. Do they like the color? Can they see well in that space? And they also, there's a whole lot of government type education on energy efficiency. So that's been the second topic in lighting. The big thing that isn't really addressed is light is critical for health. It's a major function of light. And when you see the wrong light at the wrong time, it can have really severe effects on overall health, on lifespan, on mortality, on major disease risk, and so forth. And
Yeah.
people just don't see that. It's not visible to them. And I think that's the problem. And so part of it is having people understand that, what comes in through our eyes, what we see, is a broad spectrum. Some of it's visible, some of it's invisible. Even the visible light is we see as white or yellowish white light from either the sun or from electric light. And people don't think very much about what the composition is and don't necessarily realize that it is the composition of color wavelengths within that light that actually has huge effects on health.
Yeah.
So basically, it seems too obvious, too convenient, it's always there, taken for granted, and I think the evidence is that it is a major cause of ill health in our society now. The fact that we live indoors, we live under very artificial lights, and the modern LEDs are highly artificial. They don't
Yeah.
resemble natural light at all. And the impact of that light during the day as well as during the night is, very substantial effect on our health.
Yeah. Yeah, because we realized, like, also from our company perspective, that somehow this topic, to talk about light, everyone, I think no one is really thinking about it, and not at all, And I mean, there's some studies who say like we are 95% indoors, and most of the light right now is actually it's only LED light right now. Like let's say if we go 10 years back or 20 years back, things have been a little bit different. Of course, you had the other energy efficient light, with all the other stuff, but in the end, we still had the incandescent bulbs, right? And
Right.
so this is a big part which get put away through energy efficiency, of course, And we found it quite interesting because it's always a topic you think like people would think about it, but actually no one really cares about. And in Germany, it's also when you talk about the word light, you're straight away in the alternative scene. And I'm not sure how it is in the United States when it comes to that topic, but here it is really the case, and it's a really tough thing to educate people about it.
Right. Well, there's a huge scientific basis on this. So
Yeah.
basically, there's a lot of things in the alternative space that don't have um, very much documentation or peer-reviewed science behind it, and there are a lot of ideas floating around in the universe about alternative forms of medicine, and all the rest of it. But when it
Yeah.
comes to light, we actually understand the physiology very well. We understand the mechanisms. We understand the receptors in our eyes that detect certain wavelengths of light. We
Yeah.
understand the physiology of it. 20,000 peer-reviewed scientific publications, in the last 20 years, and 30,000 scientists been working on it around the world, publishing papers, for example, on the effect of light and circadian rhythm. So it's a huge area of research, and yet the scientists know about this, and you mentioned the consensus study I did to pull together. It wasn't just me talking; it was the scientific community. I pulled together the leading scientists in the space. I judged it by how many peer-reviewed publications did they have, which came up in a search of circadian rhythms and light. And out of that, we narrowed down to the 250 of the scientists who had the largest number of publications, um, and then we, questioned them on what was um, uh, substantiated in their view, and what wasn't. And we came down with a very clear understanding that, what I'm talking about, which is that for example, the circadian rhythms are then synchronized by blue light around 480 nanometers coming in through the eyes, that its
Yeah.
receptors, melanopsin in the retinal ganglion cells that's detecting it, again with a peak sensitivity around 480, that in turn synchronizes the SCN. And if you see that light outside the normal daytime, the solar daytime, then in fact it's highly disruptive and leads to increased risk of obesity, diabetes, cancer, and the like. So all that is, well-established science and a matter of consensus of the scientific community. And that's again part of trying to get this out into the mainstream. Um, and so, but yes, it is still, the average intelligent person walking down the street who's generally aware of, reads the newspapers and so forth, is really not aware of this.
Yeah.
They don't aware that the light you see is as important to your health, as I say in my book, The Light Doctor,
Yeah.
as the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat. And we are living in a world of junk light. These LED lights you can classify as junk light, rather like junk ultra processed food, that have maybe pleasant to use, maybe convenient to use, and all those things, but have really disastrous effects on health and chronic ill health and also lifespan.
Yeah.
So that's part of something that it's a really important message. I think one of the interesting things is you can actually advise people these days what to do. The solutions are now available, and if you follow a very simple formula of really getting the natural light during the daytime, particularly in the morning hours, getting outside, outdoor light with its full spectrum, that you avoid blue rich light in the evenings, either various ways, blue blocking glasses, light bulbs that have no blue in them, and in the night sleep you just radically change your feeling, and people feel better within a few days if
Yeah.
they adopt that routine,
I
as
mean,
opposed to
yeah.
just living their regular lifestyles.
I mean, this is what we constantly hear from our customers as well, and we always because I mean there is not that much scientific evidence for blue blocking glasses, right? I mean there are a couple of studies which have been done, but actually no, it's from the physiological standpoint, it should be a normal thing to maybe reduce blue light. Like maybe not say block everything. You can do that as well. Like a lot of companies like that do that as well. But um, before we get into that topic, I wanted to ask you what is important for what is a strong influence on the circadian rhythm? You said already light. Are there any other indicators as well, like sports and nutrition, all this stuff, like what you do in the morning? Or but would you say light is the key player and everything else comes last?
Well, the key out Zeitgeber, as the
Yeah,
German word is being used, because a lot of the original science was done in Germany. Jürgen Aschoff and his group at the Max Planck Institute, and introducing terms like Zeitgeber, the timekeeper, the
yeah,
body. is light. That is the key and the strongest influence. It is. There are other influences, and certainly in many animal studies have shown that the timing of food can
Yeah.
help synchronize body clocks. So if you have constrained the diet to a particular time, um, of day, then in fact the clocks can synchronize to that, and you can that is a time cue, but it's a secondary time cue as compared to the effect of light. So
Okay.
yeah, no, it is. When I started in this field, and my career goes back quite a way, back into the last century, as we like to say. Um, at the time when I started at Harvard, it was not known that, in fact, it was believed that the synchronizing cue for humans was social contacts between people and something to do with the social environment. And that
Interesting.
was the prevailing belief at that time, even though the animal studies were showing that light was the key synchronizer. And one of the things we did, the first studies we did, was showing that in fact it was indeed light, that light in fact does entrain synchronized circadian clocks, and it does it through what's called a phase response curve. So the sensitivity of the system is such that light in the evening delays the clock timing of the clock, and light in the morning advances the time of the clock. And that nudging back and forth by the light dark cycle is what keeps us adjusted to the seasons, and what keeps us adjusted when we fly across time zones and get reestablished. But essentially, it is that light dark cycle. And in today's world, as we've been talking about, it's an extremely weak signal because when we're living indoors during the daytime, and you mentioned spending 95% of the time indoors, and seeing very little outside light. The light intensity indoors is up to 1,000 times less than you get outside. So
Yeah.
in the natural world, before we had electric light and everyone lived indoors, back in the pre-Edison days, in the century before last, um, what we had then is an environment where people were having bright light exposure during the day, darkness at night because they didn't really have electric lights. And in the evenings, they used candles and wood fires, which have no blue in them. So they had the formula of no blue content in the evenings. And and everything to do with the quality of sleep was so much better. And we sort of know that because a nice study done by a professor at the University of Colorado, who Ken Wright, who basically took a group of people, regular average people, out into the wilderness with no time clocks, no electronics, no flashlights, no source of artificial light at all, and had them camp out there for a week, and their sleep radically improved, and they felt better and healthier and everything else when they're exposed to that natural environment. So that's been pretty well established. And interestingly, also is some people are in their normal living are night people. Some people get up late in the morning and sleep in and work late into the night. Other
Yeah.
people are morning types. Many people between the two who get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's me. But are in bed by 10. So those types of people all go back into being on a similar pattern when they're in the natural world, which tells you that it is the exposure or the different sensitivity to the blue rich LED lights in the evening that's causing the problem. And
Do you think night also people who are really like late working are actually the most sensitive people to light? Can you
yes,
say that?
yeah, that
Yeah,
what appears to
it's
be. They're
interesting.
most sensitive,
Yeah,
most easily shifted,
yeah,
delayed, where their sleep is delayed. So
yeah.
that seems to be yes, because they merge together.
Okay.
So it's a difference. There's quite a bit of a difference between how much the shifting of the clock between individuals and the suppression of key hormones like melatonin. And
Yeah,
as you know, the part of this mechanism, lights come in through the eyes, detected by the blue detectors, the melanopsic, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, the IPGRCs, back through the retinal hemic tract into the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's the master clock in the brain. And
yeah,
then the messages are distributed out via hormonal and other neural links, but one of the key hormonal links is the pineal, which produces a peak of melatonin in the middle. And that goes through the entire body, that melatonin, and tells the cells of the body that it's dark outside. It's the darkness hormone. It's not a sleep hormone, by the way. That's one of the misconceptions. People think that it's causing sleep. It's not.
Yeah.
You can actually give melatonin to people and not make them sleepy in normal physiological doses. But essentially, that's the system. It keeps the whole body because it's not just a system of one master clock, the circadian clock. There are clocks in billions of our cells throughout the body. Our organs and tissues and everything else have their own clocks. And as much of the health problem is not just the desynchrony, the out of mismatch between environmental time and geophysical time and the master clock, it's also the mismatch between the various systems of the body. So basically, everything in the body is out of timing with each other, and that's part of the pathology that leads to the increased risk of heart disease,
Yeah.
diabetes, and so forth.
The thing is, when people talk about circadian dysfunction in Germany, still everyone is only quoting shift workers, and also people who are really like firemen, firefighters, or nurses and stuff. But I mean, when we call, can we call it already circadian dysfunction if we get up one morning at 10, the next morning at 6 in the morning, and we go to bed at 2 or 10, and we always shift between those things? Is that already causing the major dysfunctions?
Absolutely. Yeah, just the merely exposure to blue rich light in evening hours increases the risk of these diseases, the shifting of your clocks, and particularly irregularity. In other words, one of the big things is recently in recent years has been longevity studies. How
Yeah.
long do people live, or how fast do they die over time, followed over time, depending on the light that they see. And so people who, for example, get out in the exposed to the most sunlight and daylight, a study of 29,000 Swedish women, they live the longest. Interesting, it was a study, they were concerned about the development of skin cancers because of sunlight in these Swedish women. And actually, the big finding they had, totally surprising, some of the best science is when you don't get what you expect,
Yeah.
was this increase of lifespan that was as big effect as whether they were smokers or non-smokers in terms of scale. So that's light during the day. Light at night, similarly, the more light you see, the more light you have in the bedroom, for example, at night. And we're not talking about just shift workers because these conditions occur with people who use lights at night, and a lot of people do. Amazing number of people do. I was staggered to find the surveys showing 50% of people have some significant amount of light in the bedroom at night. Sometimes
Crazy.
because of
Yeah. Yeah.
anxiety, they have the TV on and whatever it is. But that in turn is associated with longevity.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at all these studies, the third part of it is the regularity, and that's what you were originally referring to. Um, Again, lifespan is linked to how regular is your life, and so people who are on a clockwork-like schedule, getting up at the same time every day of the week, going to bed at the same time, sleeping on a regular schedule, and so forth, they again live significantly longer than people. And are freer of major diseases, cardiac diseases, metabolic diseases, and so forth.
Yeah.
So it is pretty fundamental. And I think it's one of the reasons we've hit a plateau. One of the fascinating things to me is that, we've got all these advances in modern medicine that have increased lifespan. When Edison invented the light bulb, that's in the 1880s, the average lifespan was 39 years. The average person died at the age of 39.
Okay.
During the now we're up to the late high 79, maybe it is, or depending on some 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 areas of the world are better than others, but basically we've lengthened. You might say, well, so what's the problem? Well, the answer is we've now plateaued there. And so I think we have increasing levels of lifespan if we, in fact, could adopt healthy circadian lighting as a result, and that means following the basic rules. So my book, The Light Doctor, is talking about what those basic rules are. What are the devices? What's the science behind it? Um, and you mentioned the science of blue blocking glasses. Well, there actually is good science to show that you can show changes in melatonin using the right blue blocking glasses, because here's the problem. There's so much stuff out there that is loosely claimed. So there are a lot of blue blocking glasses that block entirely the wrong blue. What matters is the sky blue part of the spectrum. So if we want to talk a little bit about blue for a moment,
Yeah, that would be
blue is
good.
anywhere between 400 and, in some people's definition, between 400 and 500 nanometers on the light scale. The visible light's between about 380 up to about 760, and that's the range of nanometers of visible light, all the different colors of the rainbow. Blue is a rather broad range, from about 400 to 500. You're in the violets really when you're down in the 400 to 420 range. Um, and then when you get into the royal blues, that's around 440. You get into the sky blues, that's around 480. And when you get into the 490 range, you're into aqua type colors, bluish green type colors. And what really matters is a lot of these blue blocking glasses are blocking the violet blue. They've got nothing to do with, and so and in fact, some of the biggest selling blue tinting, which makes the glasses look blue to you as you put them on, and they're sold under various names, and adds another €200 to your prescription,
Sure. Yeah.
do nothing whatsoever, because in fact they're not blocking the 480 blue. So the glasses that block the 480 blue tend to look yellow orange in color. It's one giveaway.
Yeah.
But those glasses you can clearly show clear effects in terms of repairing melatonin and restoring melatonin and the like. So you can show the beneficial effects, and you can show increased performance. A lot of interesting studies in children now, where they give children blue blocking glasses in the evening, they give them exposure to the light in the morning, and they show their math scores go way up, as well as their quality of sleep and everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some interesting pieces to this whole thing. It's a rapidly evolving area, but it is working pretty well.
So when it comes to blue and disrupting melatonin, there are a lot of people who also claim, yeah, green light as well, and even red light can have a big effect on melatonin. But for you, like in the book, it seems like the 480 is like the key player. And of course, there's brightness as well, how bright the light
Yeah.
is, to have effect on melatonin.
Yes, it's the
Melatonin,
key
right?
things. Obviously, it's a bit like medicine, right? It's not only the chemical, but it's the dose of it, right, that
Yeah,
matters. The dose is the brightness, the intensity.
yeah,
So, when you're outdoors and it's 1,000 times brighter, every one of those colors is wavelengths is 1,000 times more intense. So
yeah,
you've got to answer both of those questions. But when we looked at light, we can to do this to figure out what it was. We constructed lights that had all sorts of different color spectrum. One of the beautiful things, by the way, about LED technology is you can spectrally engineer whatever wavelengths you want to have. And so we can construct light that had violet light but no blue whatsoever, and then had yellow and orange and red, and you can actually build it exactly as you want. And when we looked at these different lights, and then looked at where the effects were on melatonin, we could then deduce the precise wavelengths. That there's a particular fairly narrow peak around 480, it half maximum effects around 440 and 495. So it's a peak like this in the blue.
yeah,
And you could define that pretty well. And that goes along, it matches up with the spectrum for melanopsin in the eyes. There's some of the research, if you read it, was a bit misleading, because the first research looking at what color was affected that came up with these answers about green and so forth was research that was done in the dark. We realized what the problem was. We looked at all this research, and the subjects in the studies were sat in the dark with blindfolds on for 2 hours before they studied. In other words, they were totally dark adapted. So the eye is in that state in the middle of the night when you can see more, but they were fully dark adapted. And then they shone different color lights in their eyes and looked at the melatonin response, but they only did it for 30 minutes, an hour, maximum 90 minutes. and they could see that and when they mapped out the effects, the first light you see in the morning when you're dark adapted, yes, green does have an effect, and violet does have an effect. But what we wanted to do is study people fully light adapted, the normal state we're in. You and I, ever since about an hour after we woke in the morning, we've been fully light adapted all day. And
Yeah.
in that state, it is a much narrower peak, which actually becomes very useful in terms of solutions. Now we can construct lights that look pretty white, um, and um, and good visibility and all the rest of it, but we can carve out that blue when we're using the lights in the evening, and then during the daytime we can enhance that particular blue to provide that extra boost. So yeah, you
Yeah.
can engineer lights to do it. And one of the um, we wrote a whole lot of patents at that time, and then developed lights. We took them out into workplaces. We installed them about 65 Fortune 500 companies. We put them in their critical places where people were working around the clock. Showed big effects on improvement of sleep, improvements of performance, reduction in errors, and all the rest of it, which is great. And then we licensed our technology to a company called Chorus, which is now coming out with light bulbs. It already has fixtures out, which provide this automated switching between the blue rich and the blue depleted light. So some of this solution, and then there are other options out there in the marketplace with lights that are devoid of effectively blue. So there's a number of solutions already out there and available.
Interesting. Because how much light in the evening is actually enough to literally to suppress melatonin? Because it's also a common question we get asked. Now, is it just if I open the door of my fridge, is that light already having a big effect on melatonin, or is it more on the long term that if I look for 1 or 2 hours, if I'm yeah, into bright light?
Well, a brief exposure, looking in the fridge is not going to do too much, but even if you did have half an hour of staring in your fridge, you'd see a dip in melatonin, but it would
Yeah.
recover again when you went back into darkness. It wouldn't suppress the entire rhythm.
Yeah.
Um, so it is a relatively transient effect. The problem is when people are in light during extended time, um, we're pretty sensitive to light. The thing that matters, though, is the amount of this critical blue light. And so we are able to determine the threshold. You need to have less than 2 microwatts per square centimeter coming into the eyes. We know exactly the dose during those evening hours, and then you avoid the problem. And by the way, that corresponds to about 2% in the regular lighting conditions. About 2% of that light is in the sky blue color of the total light spectrum. And that, by the way, is pretty similar to what candles do and wood fires do, which have very little light, less than 1% light in most candles and wood fires, which is what it was in the old days. It's these LEDs today with 15, 20, 25% blue content that
Yeah.
are so devastating, in fact, of health. And interestingly, a recent study just came out showing they also impair color vision too, as compared to full spectrum light. It's an interesting study showing that it's not just a health problem; it's just it's a visual perception problem as well with the LEDs we use.
Would you say the LED, because the typical LED, which maybe has a how you say Farbwiedergabe-Index, a color index of like 80, for example, it has its peak most of the time at like 440 or 450, right? And then you have the dip as well.
Yes,
Uh,
it's a very artificial pattern, but
yeah,
basically it's to do with energy efficiency. Most energy efficient point in the spectrum to convert electricity into light is around 440, 450, right?
yeah,
And these are the blue LED dyes or chips. That then is phosphor converted. These LEDs then have a phosphor layer over them, which converts the light from the blue to other colors of the rainbow in order to get a more balanced white light. But even so, the blue spike still comes through. So you get this blue spike. You tend to get a bit of a dip. So the around 480, there is not so much light coming through. There's more than you want in the evening, and there's too little during the daytime. It's neither good nor bad there. Um,
Yeah.
so
Because, because I found it quite interesting when it comes to like how much light do we actually need. And you said like, okay, outside it's like 1,000 times more we need, you know, and you always have those numbers, for example, in the workplace, like in Germany, they would say between 300 and 500 lux, for example, on the table. You know, and I found it really interesting in your book because then you said like, okay, you actually have to measure it like horizontally onto the eye level and to see how much light is
yeah,
actually getting into the eyes. And I actually did it myself because I have some measurements here as well. And uh, I was shocked because it was only 50 to 150 lux in the eyes, you
that's
know, and
right.
you had like this magic number of 250 lux. Like, how did you get to that number? And because if you're outside, it's like it's always like 10,000 lux,
Right.
100,000 lux, or whatever, you know. And how did you get to that number?
Well, the issue is basically it's a matter of experimentation. But getting into this, first of all, the whole of the lighting industry is um, it's a design and architectural industry. Industry. In other words, the people who specify lighting are called lighting designers,
Yeah,
and that's because it's all about aesthetics.
yeah,
And it's also to do with the function of when you talk about desktop, you're talking about the light in the desktop because if you're reading something and you have something on your, in front of you on a table, they're looking at how much light there is there, and then they look at, what light levels you need to be able to read text of a certain font and so forth. And so it's all to do that. It's all that functional type of reason and design type reason, and never about health. What we were obviously focused on, what matters is actually the light coming in the eyes, and that's how and one of the key things was to figure out, systematically through experimentation, how much light coming into the eyes made the effect and what spectrum it was, what intensity. So yes, you're right. It's about in a rough, if you've got something where the formal recommendations from the lighting industry is that workplaces, for example, should have 300 to 500 lux on the tabletop. In reality, the amount of lux coming in through the eyes is about 50% of that or less, just as you were
interesting.
describing,
Yeah,
right? That's what
yeah.
the reality, depending on what's reflecting off the walls and everything else.
Would you say can you change that with the 250 lux into the eyes with a proper blue spectrum or like say let's say 4,000 Kelvin? Is that enough then to stimulate the clock and that it gets a proper stimulus, or so you can actually also
No,
be
it's
inside?
not. It's not really enough with a standard
Uh,
LED. It's not enough. You've got to run it quite bright, up
yeah,
to 1,000 lux or more, in order to the desktop, in order to start getting the levels of light that are physiologically relevant during the daytime.
yeah,
So the problem is we are living in effectively twilight levels of light, and that's the problem. Now, the other thing we should talk about is the measurements of light. We've talked about lux. That is an old measurement. It's been around for 100 years.
yeah,
Basically, um, it first came out in about 1924, all right? And they looked at different lights and figured out how bright they looked. And it so happens that the visual brightness of light is really all to do with the amount of green and yellow in the light. So this measure of lux, which people use, and it becomes very relevant when you talk about energy efficiency. Lux is a measure of essentially green and yellow content of the light. It does not really measure the blue, does not measure the red, certainly doesn't look at the violet. Um, and so it's just a very narrow part of the light spectrum that's associated with brightness. Brightness is different from this physiological effect. The most effective, as we talked about, light for the circadian clock is around 480, which just doesn't show in the lux measurement. It's too low down and it doesn't fall. So when we start looking at rules for light bulbs and regulations that are used to ban incandescents and ban halogens and the like, they use this measure of lumens per watt. Now, lumens and lux are very parallel things. In other words, lumens is the lux is the amount of light coming out of the light bulb. Lux is the amount that falls on the surface. So,
yeah.
but essentially, lumens is the output of what comes out of a bulb. And so, when you talk lumens per watt, you're really talking about the amount of yellow and green per watt. Well, that's nonsensical because what it means is that light bulbs that are full spectrum, in other words, the sun's natural spectrum, actually have to put energy into producing, and hence their lumens per watt is way down, and they cannot meet the new standards. So essentially, they're systematically eliminating healthy light bulbs in favor of light bulbs that are, as I say, cheap junk, bright light, and in the name of energy efficiency. So it's a major problem. In other words, light should not be measured just by brightness. It should be measured by the health impact of that light or the physiological impact of the light. And
Yeah.
how efficiently are you delivering that if you're going to worry about efficiency?
Yeah. So when it's not about efficiency, when it's literally about the health impact, can you have, for example, a 4,000, like in the office environment, most of the time it's like 4,000 Kelvin, right?
Mhm.
And can you have that light like having a 480 peak as well, for example, or like a full spectrum LED light? And how
Yeah.
important is it to like then constantly have those 250 lux in the eyes also during the day? Because a lot of people say, oh, you only need that light in the morning and everything else. And in the midday, you have a dead zone and nothing happens from your circadian perspective and stuff. But would you still say that it's really important to have that bright light also during the day?
I think it's important to have bright lights if you can during the day. The key time, though, what I always advise is get out in the morning, um, outside, outdoor light, because you need that big dose, and you need the big dose of full spectrum light, the UV, the visible, and the infrared, because all of it has very significant health impacts. All that. So it's not just the circadian story. The circadian story is the 480 blue, but we care about the amount of red that you see because that actually restores 670 red restores mitochondrial function, and near infrared light, particularly around the 800 range, penetrates deep into the bodies and actually boosts mitochondrial cytochrome oxidase, the enzyme which produces ATP and energy in the body, which is highly restorative, highly healing, and all the rest of it. We also need to see the lights down 420 and 405, antibacterial effects. Light in the green part of the spectrum calms the amygdala, reduce migraine pains, and so forth. There's all sorts of healing things buried in the light that you can't monkey around with what Mother Nature gave us. And so getting outside in the mornings is key. So why do we say mornings? Well, that effect of blue light is most effective in synchronizing the clocks in the morning because the natural clock tends to drift a little bit later, so you want to nudge it in the morning. Secondly, the effect of infrared light on boosting mitochondria and restoring glucose metabolism and everything else is actually a morning effect and doesn't occur in the afternoon. So getting outside is part of the key. But I
Yeah.
would not say live in the dark all day. If you can be near a window, people who have offices with windows on them, as opposed to people working in cubicles, sleep better, get more hours of sleep. Naturally, the people who have the windowed offices. So yeah, I think it's and that's part of the whole story. The other side of it, while we're on the subject of getting outside, there's a enthusiastic minority who want to get up and watch the sunset every day. I think that's key. Now I can see the mystical and spiritual aspects of that.
Yeah.
Physiologically and health-wise, it's not necessarily the best idea because what it will do is fall on that sensitive part of the curve. We talked about the phase response curve and actually shift you significantly advance. In other words, it will shift you eastward in terms of your clock and actually get you out of sync. So that's not necessarily a good thing. So basically, I'd like to say, get out in the first half of the morning before the sun's really bright, but you don't have to get up at dawn, especially in the summer months when dawn, sun might rise at 5 in the morning. Then a dose of light at that time isn't necessarily a great thing. It could actually cause more circadian disruption.
Okay. So basically, because there's this theory also when it comes to like healthy LED or like literally a blue light, like blue always needs like the counterpart red. If you make it really simple, like you have some energy,
Yeah.
like some activating light, some highly energy highlight, and then you have the red and infrared light, and you kind of need the balance. So is there, I mean, most all the light right now in offices and stuff, and we just spend time there, and we cannot just be outside all the time. Like, is there any LED light which is maybe neutral or even has a positive effect? Because I know there's like we were in contact with this Chinese company, and they kind of developed an LED technology which goes up to 1,000 nanometers, which is really interesting. But of course, it's not energy efficient at all, and you're not allowed to bring it on the market in Europe, which is crazy. But do you have any solutions for that when it comes to that topic? Because there's some people say, for example, as well that blue light between 400 and 460, let's say, is really high and it creates oxidative stress in the retina and stuff. And if you don't have that red and infrared also in the typical LED light in the office space, you always create damage, or because it's a big question what blue light hazard really means, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a matter of, as we talked about, it's a matter of intensity, right?
Yeah.
So basically, yes, there is a window between about 425 and 450 where cell death, apoptosis in the retina can occur, but only with very bright light. So
Okay.
out in really bright sunlight in the Australian desert or whatever, you know, intense light that can cause damage to the eyes. We know that also. But essentially, yes, but it's very much intensity related. So you're not really going to see that type of damage indoors because you're 1,000 times dimmer indoors, or 100 to 1,000 times dimmer. Um, but it essentially is something. There are balancing the spectrum is the other side of your question. I think there's a lot we're learning about the ability of balancing the blue and the red together, um, red parts of the spectrum and the infrared. And I think the light sources, we're still a lot of research and technology development going on. There's very active work in the infrared space, which is really fascinating work, substantial still than the circadian, which is really well worked out, and we've been at that one for 40 years, figuring out how all that works. But one of the new areas is infrared, and that's a very interesting part of the equation. So I think we're learning a lot about it. As I say, if in doubt, revert to the natural world, get outside during the mornings and sleep in the dark at night, and you're doing half the battle then.
Yeah. Because in your book, you created the special light with a 480 peak, right?
Yes.
So does that 480, if you go constantly under it during the day, is it helping you to be more like that you have more energy, or what is
Yeah.
the key reason why you chose that? Yeah.
Well, the 480 is synchronizing the
Yeah.
circadian clock, so it gives a beneficial. It is also associated with a boost in cognitive energy of cognitive alertness, cognitive performance, and so forth. It's also boosted by that light. So basically, having that capacity to deliver that light is part of the formula. And then, as I say, removing it in the evening hours is the other side of it, flipping to effectively a zero blue light if you
Yeah.
can do it during the evening hours.
So if people don't have the option to go outside in the morning, because you're really busy, like, would you then consider some other option that you get in front of this SAD lamp, which is 5,600 Kelvin or stuff? Or what would you do if you cannot go outside?
Well, I think any blue rich light source can help.
Yeah.
I think that gives you a boost. Um, and so it is an option. I would say to you that getting outside is highly beneficial if you can do it. So that's choice number one. But yes, if you can't, then you can provide some of the benefits with blue rich light in the mornings.
Yeah. And not necessarily, because you also wrote you can actually you could create that also with the 4,000 Kelvin light, but not necessarily the super cold white light, right?
Yeah, I
But
think the real issue is the Kelvin again is another metric that is not really it is related to the level of blue, but it is not very, um, it's only partially related. So we were able to mess around with developing LEDs. We could develop LEDs that had the same around 330, 3,500 Kelvin. By the way,
yeah,
the preferred visual experience of people in a work in an office or workplace is somewhere between comfort level is between 3,000 and 4,000. When you get
Yeah.
up above 4,000, it starts feeling harsh type lights. So many of the you know LED lights and the headlights approaching you from modern cars are this hugely harsh bluish light, really
Yeah.
disruptive. But down the other side below that, you get very yellowish type light as you go down below 3,000. So that tends to be the range. But the thing is about Kelvin is people say, oh, well, let's use 5,000 Kelvin in the daytime and 2,700 Kelvin at night. Well, the reality is a 3,000 Kelvin or 2,700 Kelvin has about still has 8% blue content. And as I told you, you want to be down below 2,
Yeah.
preferably 1% blue content. So it's got 8 times more. It's not until you get down to extremely low color temperatures, 1900 Kelvin,
Yeah.
which is a really deep orange light, that then you get essentially the zero or near zero blue. And so it's a rather inefficient way. And in fact, if you look at um, comparison of different lights, there's one study comparing 2700 Kelvin, 4000, and 6500 Kelvin lights, all these LEDs. The amount of actual 480 was almost the same in all of them because the spike at 450 was going up and down,
Yeah.
and the amount of light in the yellow orange was going up and down, but the actual point in the middle, which is the most biologically sensitive in the circadian clock, was virtually changing not at all. So you can actually have, in fact, we were able to construct lights at the same Kelvin, 3500, that had 20% blue or had less than 2% blue
Yeah.
at the same Kelvin color temperature. So color temperature is a very bad guide. It's something the industry has tended to present as a circadian solution that's very the color temperature, but it really is a pretty ineffective solution.
How do you calculate the 20%? Are there any measurement gadgets, or do you just
Yeah.
see the whole spectrum and
So,
you have
so
a look at?
absolutely, you take the visible spectrum between
Yeah.
380 and 760,
Yeah.
and then you add up all the power in every single nanometer across, and then you look at of that percentage, which falls between 440 and 495, which is the half maximum range, um, and you just divide one by the other. In other words, Excel, you can just simply calculate it with an Excel table if you have the light spectrum.
Yeah, because I really like that in the book that you have those specific numbers, like with the 2 microwatts and the what was it, 250? Yeah, like during the day, the two like with the really low blue. And I
Yeah.
think it's really important in our because everyone has another truths out there, and there's so many people who say like, oh yeah, green is really damaging you and this. And I think we need more people to come out there and to say like, okay, come on, now we know this from the scientific perspective from the last
Right.
20 years. And
Yeah.
let's just maybe have a baseline and then work from there again, and not, everyone is the expert and no one knows what is the real truth right now. Or I don't know what to say real truth, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah.
Right, right. Well, I mean, part of
Yeah.
what I did in my book, The Light Doctor, is I provided a large reference to the literature so that you
Yeah.
can basically dig down. This is good. I mean, this is very solid, established science about the regulation of the circadian clock. Um, so, yeah, and there are a lot of people claiming all sorts of things out there. Uh, but as I say, what I'm focusing on is what's really known, and then I'm very interested in what the new findings that are coming out are. Um, fascinating research right now on the role of a new opsin that's around 380. The sensitivity, in other words, it's sensitive to ultraviolet or deep violet light between 360 and 400. Light, incidentally, that's removed by your eyewear. You take anything below 400 is got filters on in your eyewear. Anything your window glass removes light below 400. Um,
Yeah.
but that light is actually critical for children and the development of myopia. So if you're deprived of that deep violet because you don't play outside and maybe you wear glasses, then in fact, the short-sightedness, myopia develops, which is a huge problem. It's moving from 25% of Asian kids to almost 50% of Asian kids right now globally. Um, and so that's part of the that's part of the problem. So what's really interesting is, we're just learning about different parts of the ultraviolet spectrum, and we've been very much dominated by the fear of going outside,
Mm.
educated by the skin cancer doctors, right? In other words,
Yeah.
avoid sunburn, avoid getting cancers. What's fascinating in these studies, by the way, yes, people who spend more time outdoors get more cancers or more skin lesions, um, but they live years longer. So, by the way, golfers, interesting little tidbit, people who play golf are getting out quite regularly,
Yeah.
um, and they're spending 2 or 3 hours outdoors. It's one of the
Yeah.
sports that guarantees you'll spend a long time outdoors just to do a round. They live on average 5 years longer. And that's a study of 300,000 golfers compared to the 300,000 non golfers in Sweden. And Sweden's got great databases of every member of their population's health and history. And the reduction of cardiovascular disease is much greater and so forth.
Mm.
So you could say maybe some of it's the exercise, but when you balance it out, or maybe it's the socioeconomic status of the people who play golf as opposed to don't, but that they can rule out by matching up. And interestingly, the ones with the lowest handicaps, the best handicap scores, actually live longer than the ones who are more casual, occasional player.
Interesting. Do you play golf?
I don't, but I
You don't?
I do other things to get outside. Yeah,
Okay. Because I like in the book you finish with your form of light diet, right?
yeah,
And I mean, you mentioned it already, get out in the morning, get out in the sun, also maybe during the day, spend as much outside as possible, and during the night, avoid light, right? Is that a good summary, or did I miss something more?
no, that's a
Yeah.
pretty good summary. I mean, that's the basics, right? And absolutely. So yeah, this is basic lesson is your light diet is as important as your nutritional diet in terms of your health.
100%. So you also try not to eat after sunset and all these kind of things because of all the evidence, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Uh,
the again regular timing of meals and not eating too late in the evening, I think is important. Um, and regular exercise. Caffeine is interesting. There's a lot of work now showing that drinking a couple of cups of coffee is actually in the mornings is really boosting to health and well-being and longevity. So I drink my coffee, I get out in the sun, and I do my exercise every day.
awesome. Man. Do you take any supplements?
No, no, especially no. I'm pretty. I do a multivitamin just because there are data shows that general health is good. And with multivitamins. But yeah, no, I'm not obsessive about 101 different things or special diets. I think keeping that in moderation, what you eat is, and make sure it's a really properly mixed diet, as opposed to just being a very narrow fad diet of some sort.
Yeah. I want to ask you like one or two more last more questions, and it's more about why do you do the work you do? Is it because you think like I do something good for this world and that people get healthier through that, or is it just because you're super interested in that topic, or what is the purpose behind it?
Oh, certainly it's a purpose, it's a mission, right? In other
Yeah,
words,
yeah,
I want to do something during my lifetime that really contributes. I've been fortunate enough to do it in an environment that's been really fun and creative. In other words, I got in right when I started. This area was virtually unresearched. In fact, when I entered medical school, there were only 3 papers published on light and circadian rhythms that year, and now they're in the thousands. But we were able to get in the beginning, and that was really fun because able to answer that we were able to discover the circadian clock in the human brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and locate it. Able to
yeah,
show that it was synchronized by light. Able to show then in turn. So it's really a question of following interesting questions and answering them. But at this stage in my life, I'm really I want to educate, and I think there's an educational mission. People need to understand this because it's so
100%.
critical to their health, and that's a reason to get up in the morning. And so, yeah, I love the science. I love the discovery process. And but and even more, I love the process of really making a difference.
Yeah. I mean, this is what we 100% need, and it fits to the question what I asked you in the beginning. Why, like at least in Germany, it's a really unattractive topic, and if you ask around, yeah, not many people, like not at all, like maybe if a handful, like we are 85 million people in Germany, and no one in all those big conferences about health, no one is talking about light, you know? Now, since Andrew Huberman with his podcast and stuff, you know, like since then, maybe some more people are like going out in the morning, and it has a really big impact for those people. But still in Germany, even the circadian researchers, I talked to some of them are from like from the Munich University here, they're in their bubble, you know, we're in our bubble,
Yeah.
and we somehow need to have these conversations, you know, to maybe
Yeah.
and then of course get with these information, like get to the normal public and talk more about it there. And yeah, it's a challenge definitely, because you don't really make much money with it, you know. It's
Yeah, well,
maybe
I think it's something that really needs a breakthrough moment, and we have not reached that tipping point, as I say, where it has become broadly known. The media really ignores it, and for the most part, they'll talk about all sorts of, other issues and health issues and so forth, but really don't address light.
yeah,
But it's, and I think one of said very nicely by someone who said, well, the scientists all know about it, but they only talk to each other. They don't talk to their neighbor over the garden fence.
yeah,
So in fact, my wife is interesting. I live in a town in just outside Boston called Wellesley. It's the most educated town in America, in the sense the percentage of the adults over 25 who have advanced degrees, right? They may be, they may be everything from doctors and lawyers and God knows what else, right? But they are, the percentage is way up into the high 50s of every adult over the age of 25. Um, and my wife makes the point when she meets people on the street of asking them, do they know about this? And virtually none of them do. So we haven't even penetrated the sort of the educated elite, let alone the general population yet.
I mean, that's a big question. How, because you know, Dr. McGilchrist about the left and right brain theory.
Yeah,
Yeah, like these kind of stuff. And it's really interesting if you're really deep into academic stuff, and you know, you're really in your linear way of thinking, super rational. And I mean, there are those studies where actually show like people were super into just academics and stuff, you know, that they actually in contact with maybe themselves or maybe with nature, you know, and maybe because of that, people don't really feel themselves anymore. And through that, you don't really feel like, is this like helping me or not? And people who are more outside, they also have less psychological issues, right? Like with people who work with hands and outside in the sun. Of course, it makes totally sense with what you say, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah,
I think that's the mission.
yeah, yeah,
And so delighted to do podcasts. I hope you get
yeah.
a good audience, and I'm spreading out the word on. I do Instagram and I do, Twitter and X. I do all sorts of I do a Substack column also, by the way, every 2 weeks, updating in this science, and that's building a multi-thousands audience there.
Awesome.
But
Yeah.
it needs to get out in the mainstream, and so I really appreciate the chance to talk with you. And this is an important subject and one where there really are real answers of things that work and are very easy to do for the average person. You don't have to be a scientist to do this.
And thank you for this conversation. I will send you all the details about the episode and you can share it as well. And yeah, thanks. And good
Brilliant.
luck with everything in the future with you and on your mission.
Good. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Appreciate it.